Okay. Hi everyone. Hi. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon, Mehiret. Good afternoon, Mahwa. Komane. Good afternoon. How are you all? Good morning too, if it's still morning where you are. Hi, Patience. Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm very excited to have you all here. My name is Angela, and I'll be with you throughout the whole of today. So we'll give some more time for some people to join us, and then we'll start. But in the meantime, you can let me know your name and where you're joining us from. Yes, Uganda is very beautiful today. It's very sunny, although it wants to rain. Yes, but that's been the season. And it's usually cold, but today it's warm, so that's a blessing. Yeah, but how are you, Patience? How is where you are? How are you, Komane? Where are you joining us from? Mahwa, where are you joining us from? Mehiret, Heba, where are you joining us all from? How is it there? How is the weather that side? Addis is rainy. Wow. Okay. I think this is an East African problem right now. The rainy season it's a lot, you know? This month needs to decide if it's a refrigerator or a month. We need to know because it's too much. Thank you for letting us know this is rainy. How are you coping with the rains? How are you coping with the rains, Heba, in Addis? Oh, wow, Maseru, Lesotho. Lesotho. I hope I'm pronouncing it. It's just cool that side. Yes, very cool that side. I heard it's the highest point in Africa, so maybe that might explain why. I don't know. Do you guys in Lesotho have like a hot season? Oh, okay. Hi, Mehiret. Yes, it's raining too. Yeah, that's why I say it must be an East African issue. It's raining only in times of work. Well, at least it's not hot at night, you know? So it's always better to sleep in the rainy season. Um, Maho joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Okay, that's very cool. That's wonderful. Very cool at the moment. Oh, okay, that's very, very good to know. Yes. So I'm saying that almost everywhere it's very cool or cold. Yeah, okay, that's good. But at least I don't know, what would you prefer, a hot season or a rainy season? Personally, I like hot seasons, but that's just me. But yeah, I just always wish it to shine all the time. But tell me, what do you prefer, a hot season or a rainy season? Sorry, I went off there for a bit, but I had asked which one would you prefer, a rainy or cold with moderate rain is perfectly fine with me. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. What do you like to do? Are you like a tea person, Heba, or a coffee person? Because most people that like that, they really do like the cold weather. Gives them an excuse to always take tea or coffee. Coffee, especially Ethiopian macchiato, is amazing. Wow, okay. Okay. All right. I'll definitely want to try it sometime. I definitely want to try it sometime. In cold weather, though. In cold weather. Home is fine with me. My region has a lot of rains, and I moved to a place with a lot of sun. I think Patience is speaking my language. I think I'm one of those who would consider moving to another place because of, like, the warmth and what. And I've always asked this question, and maybe I can also ask it today. Which one would you prefer? Like, if you were to get stuck in the world and they said tropical rainforests, and it's always damp and what, or a desert, which one would you prefer? Would you prefer tropical rainforest for the rest of your life or a desert? You take into account food. You have to hunt for your own food. I don't know what's in, yeah, a tropical rainforest. What would you eat in a tropical rainforest? A desert. I think Stephen is speaking my language. I prefer a desert. What would you eat in a tropical rainforest? A rainforest? Please. Tropical rain? Nah. No, no, no. I don't. It has too much going on. Like, it's so damp, and the desert is. Like, I've never been to a desert, so maybe that's why I'm choosing desert. But you eat from some trees are poisonous, Heba. Some trees are poisonous. Having water issues is not fun. Well, yeah, that's when having water issues is not fun. I think there are places that have some water in the desert. There is food in the desert. There's food in, I think I don't know if there's some crops. I need to go to a desert and see if there's some crops they grow in a desert. I really need to. What would you grow in a desert though? Yeah, I think there's some crops that are grown in a desert. Tropical rainforest has a lot going on. Like, where would you sleep? Cactus, yeah, cactus is good for the body. I've seen it being sold around Kampala here. And I don't remember the reason why I asked why they said it, but they actually sell it to eat in the market. And I was shocked. I was very shocked. But yeah, that's one. We'll eat a cactus. Exactly, Stephen. Our desert has great views and food. Yeah. And if we have cars, I've seen those cars that they ride in Dubai. We'll do that, But what can you do in a rainforest other than worry that if I sleep here, a snake is going to bite me, or there's a millipede, or, it's wet all the time. Like, it's wet all the time. It's wet all the time. Precious would not be eating sand in the desert. We'll be sleeping on the sand. Yeah, but the snakes in the desert, I don't know. They're not fat. They're not so big as the ones the ones in the tropical rainforest have food to eat, so they are big. The ones in the desert are skinny. They don't have energy to chase after you, Um, Mr. Stephen is joining us from Namibia. Wow, thank you. Thank you. How is Namibia today? Mr. Will not get banned. Will not get banned. We'll adopt to the weather. Okay, I'm saying this because I've never been to a desert. But anyway, so we'll be starting in the next 2 minutes. Yes, please.
I'm saying Namibia is very sad, and we have a beautiful desert. So.
Oh, yeah, indeed. One of my dream countries to see, Namibia. Thank you. Yeah, I've seen the videos that come from Namibia, and I'm always like, wow, this place? Yes. And I hear it's sparsely populated. There are not so many people, so that would also be good. There is no need for sunscreen, You've had that thing of there's no need for sunscreen, if you have melanin and what, we're about to get banned, but it will be a beautiful ban, Will look nice. Anyways, we'll be starting in the next 1 minute, and we are ready. We are ready for the discussion of today, and our discussion is going to center around politics. All right, it's time. It is time for us all. And our discussion today our topic for the discussion today is the silent wounds, intergenerational trauma, collective memory, and the call for reparative justice. So right before we can even start, we can, talk about what we understand by these things. And yeah, we can place it in the chat. What do we understand by some of these words? Intergenerational trauma, collective memory, reparative justice. What does it mean to us before we even get into the discussion? What does it mean to us? It can be something as simple as, what does justice mean to you? What does trauma mean to you? What does intergenerational mean to you? Okay, so as we are placing that in the chat, we're going to have, okay, justice is simply fairness. Okay, justice is simply fairness. Okay, justice is simply fairness. So even as we drop into the chat, I'm going to welcome my boss, the Deputy Executive Director of YORJA, Mr. Enya, to come and join us. He's already here. I don't know if I'm saying join us. To come and give the opening remarks. Mr. Enya, sir, you're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, Angela. Please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, please.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon. I doubt anyone is okay. We did get a few notifications that people will be joining from outside of the continent. So maybe good evening to everyone from wherever you are joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar. The conversation, Silent Wounds, Intergenerational Trauma, Collective Memory, and the Call for Reparative Justice. It's a very exciting conversation for us. We already know the trajectory of how we got here. The African Union has declared the next decade, the decade of reparations. And yeah, before I even jump into that, I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of YORJA. I thank you for taking time to join us in this very timely and necessary conversation. It's necessary because across our continent, we continue to grapple with the lingering effects of violent conflict, displacement, colonization, systemic exclusion. These wounds are not just historical, they are inherited. They live in our memories, our bodies, our minds, our social structures, often passed down from generation to the next. They're mostly largely unspoken, but yet they are very deeply felt. This is what we mean when we speak about silent wounds. For us as an organization at YORJA, we are committed to advancing justice through meaningful research and advocacy. This conversation is not entirely about trauma. It's also about truth. It's about centering the voices of young people, survivors, and affected communities in how we remember, how we heal, how we define justice. Too often, these discussions on reparations have been reduced to technical components like legal frameworks, material compensations, state apologies. And while these are very important aspects, today we hope to ask deeper questions. What does healing really look like for our communities, for our brothers, for our sisters? How do we acknowledge the emotional, cultural, and psychological dimension of harm? And how can we make space for young people to lead these conversations, not just tokenistic in nature, but as truth holders and agents of change? Today, we are very honored to be joined by an esteemed group of practitioners and experts whose work have shaped the landscape of transitional justice, mental health, and community healing across the continent. Our keynote and panelists today are all leaders of thought. Not only that, they are also storytellers, truth seekers, and advocates rooted in real life struggles and solutions. Our hope is that this space inspires reflection. We hope through this engagement that learning and we get a renewed commitment to advancing reparative justice in ways that are very inclusive, participatory, and transformative. That as we begin to shift this conversation from trauma to truth, from silence to storytelling, from memory to movement, we're able to not just set the fire burning in our hearts, but to also pass on the baton to the people that come after us. So I would very quickly round up because I have very limited time by saying thank you all for being here. We look forward to the very wonderful and exciting insights that will come out from today's interactions, and also the connections and all that will emerge from today's dialogue. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the Youth Organization for Research and Justice Advocacy, I say welcome to this engagement. Over to you, Angela.
Wow, Mr. Enyo, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, so that was a brief preview of what is going to happen today. And without further ado, I am so excited to welcome the next person. That is Miss Mosa Letien. She's our research officer here at YORJA. And she's going to engage us in an activity that I hope each and every one of us participate in. It's going to be an exciting activity. And without further ado, Ms. Mosa, you're welcome.
Okay, good morning, everyone. If you can hear me, please just go check in your chat box. I have dropped a message and a link for you to start our exercise. My name is Mosa, and I am from Johannesburg. I am also a transitional justice enthusiast, like many of you, and I'm very pleased to be in conversation. So if you are already on the link, I need you to drop an emoji and say yes, or let's go, asande, or got it. Just drop any message in the chat box. The link is in there. It's menti.com. And I'm sure many of you know the exercise, but this is just so that we can fill the room with our knowledge and our experiences of transitional justice. Okay. I'm going to share your screen. Right. Once you are there and you have joined, I believe you can see the first question. I'm going to ask you a series of questions and just respond to those questions. Remember to hit submit at the end of the screen. And our first question is, how has intergenerational trauma affected African countries? The first option is persistent mental health challenges, and that is through the issues that we see in society, the different mental health issues, and the awakening on mental health that we see in society and the persistence thereof. Or is it through loss of cultural identity? So that is that over the years, people have been detached from their roots and their cultures, and now they no longer have a sense of belonging to who they were or are. Culturally and traditionally. And so there's that uprooting. Or is it through a distrust in institutions? And that means that over the years, because of the post-conflict situations, people have lost their trust in institutions. They no longer trust whatever memorialization, prosecutions, or reparations will take place. Or lastly, is it community level of violence and poverty? So we see the intergenerational trauma through the persistent level of violence in our community, the GBV, etc. So feel free to vote. I see the responses coming through there. And what is evident is that clearly a majority of us see it through the persistent mental health issues. And that is true, that, you know, in many of our societies, we see it through the high levels and challenges of mental health that we witness. Our second question is that what kind of reparative justice do you think would best address psychological wounds? And so that our first option is at a community healing level programs, right? So having community programs would best assist people to be able to process their historical trauma or present day realities, because that's also the thing with transitional justice. It's not just the past, but elements of the present. Or would it be through truth commissions, telling the truth and having grassroots truth commissions or institutional measures of people telling their truth and explaining what exactly happened, or is it through mental health funding and access to these facilities? Because as we know, mental health is an incredibly expensive sort of undertaking and challenge to go through. And would funding and access also be the best way to address that? So that's also another option. Or cultural revitalization. So for those who feel that cultural detachment with the revitalization hub, that would entail, for instance, a cultural renewal in a given society or other. And it seems the large majority of us believe that community healing and programs would be the best way to deal with psychological wounds, to deal with both, the past, the unfinished past, and the present day issues, because they interact. That is very true. Responsive community programs would help. Just to flag, there is no right or wrong answer. This is just so that we gauge and sort of fill the conversation with our different experiences. And then the third question, do you think that African societies are doing enough to acknowledge and heal from historical trauma? And that's why within the Year of Reparations, we want to have a broader understanding of what justice means by bringing in mental health as one of the elements. And so we have, yes, progress is being made to acknowledge the past and historical trauma, or no, this aspect is largely ignored. And it seems a large majority of us believe that it depends on country or community, on what exactly, whether there's enough. So maybe in some countries there has been a lot of progress been made, and in others not so. Or maybe it also depends on the mechanism. So a country could make significant progress in terms of prosecutions, but not necessarily with reparations. Or they did an amazing job with truth commissions, but prosecutions haven't been undertaken. So it could be a variety of issues, and indeed it depends. And our last question, whose responsibility is it to drive healing and memory work around Africa's historical trauma? So who should be driving the work around this? And our first option is governments. They should be the people in charge. Or the second one is the mental health professionals and educators. Or the third one, and that is the community leaders and traditional leaders, and that is, for a more responsive, grassroots or traditional sort of undertaking to make sure that the cultural revitalization takes place for those who feel detached. Or is it through youth and grassroots movements, or all of the above? And the House believes that all of these measures collectively is what we need to fight or build our mental health frameworks, improve our mental health frameworks and work towards that. So this is what we are looking into in our conversations. It is the year of reparations for the African Union, and Africa, with a history of slavery and solitude, should rightfully reflect on this. How has reparations been dealt with, but most importantly, how do we make them responsive? And intergenerational justice brings this modern lens to say mental health is an important element of reparations and justice. If there are no questions, Madam Angela, that is it from my side. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Mosa. I hope we're all able to vote and participate. How was the experience? Very enjoyable, very democratic. Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Mosa. Thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. I kept hearing the line, it is the year of reparations. And I was like, you know what? That line deserves to be on a shirt. I feel like putting it on a shirt. But anyway, let's go ahead and welcome our next speaker. And I'm very excited for this one. Yes. She's Miss Christella Niyonzima. And Miss Christella Niyonzima is a transitional justice and peace building practitioner with expertise in gender and conflict sensitivity. She joined Impunity Watch in 2016 and is currently the head of programs of Impunity Watch Burundi office. With a background in political science and international relations, Christella holds a master's degree in peace and governance. As well as her focus on gender equality, she is passionate about arts and culture, particularly their contribution to community-driven justice and their role in restoring the social fabric. Christella has spoken at various expert meetings and conferences on the continent, notably on the subject of gender and masculinities. She has co-produced numerous studies and articles on topics including peace building, post-conflict reconstruction, and on the women, peace and security agenda. So with all that, please welcome Ms. Christella Niyonzima. We're excited to have you, ma'am. Ms. Christella?
Thank you, Angela. It's really an honor for me to be part of this. And I'm going to apologize because I'm going to not be able to keep the camera on because of the issues about internet, and we're also having power cuts. So bear with me if I cannot just keep using my camera. I hope that's fine. And so, yeah, as introduced, I'm Christella Niyonzima, and I serve as the head of programs for Impunity Watch Burundi office, where as a team, we have worked alongside communities to support community-driven transitional justice processes with a particular focus on gender transformation, going beyond gender equals women. We've been also focusing on trauma healing through inclusive dialogue, especially between youth and their elders. And in Burundi, reparations are not abstract. They are deeply personal. They are repair or broken relationships, dignity, and trusts shattered by decades of violence, but they are also hopes. Hope of acknowledgement of the public recognition of suffering and loss, but hope also for the promise of a better tomorrow, a tomorrow that can be different from the past and from the present times that we are living today. So from facilitating community and informal truth-telling forums to championing psychosocial healing programs, we've seen how meaningful conversations, safe spaces can nurture a type of reparations that challenge the most prominent forms of reparations, and those being payments. Not that they are not important, but very narrow in regards to the needs of victims, and victims being individuals, but also communities. So we have understood and witnessed that they must reach into the hearts and minds of survivors and their descendants and be extended to wider communities. Through our transitional justice program in Burundi, for example, promoting community initiatives to deal with the past, we've heard powerful calls. We want memorials. We want our story to be told in a constructive way. And that goes beyond stories about victims, but sometimes we work also in communities whereby these recognize their role into the violence that occurred in those areas. So we are an organization whose work is centered on victims because our experience in Burundi, in DRC, Guatemala, to only name those, show that victims are often forgotten in the political processes. It's pity, but this is the reality. And we've noticed with the intergenerational trauma transmission that they cannot be dealt without youth in contexts where almost everyone is affected by these cyclical violence, where victims have been perpetrators and where the two live side by side. With the recurrence of violence in these contexts, particularly in Burundi, we've also seen that youth are not in the margin of their societies, but they are the force of these, resisting, being victims, being perpetrators, but also agents of change. So facilitating inclusive dialogues mean to take into account all those aspects, and which brought us to here simple but yet profound hopes that the collective voice of youth and elders, women and men, will shape the reconstruction of social bonds and ensure that the scars of conflict are neither erased, not forgotten, but used to reconstruct the communities and the dignity of their members. Generations in Burundi carry trauma stories of massacres that happened in specific periods that have been taken as references without questioning the origins of those massacres. For example, 1972 is understood without understanding what 1979 colonial system governance did on shaping ethnic identity, power sharing, but also structural violence, which is now embedded into the way our community is shaped. So if you progress on the historical timeline and question 1998, for example, and 1993, and the recent 2015, that means that you need to go beyond the civil war and political demonstrations that are detached from the past violence. So everything is like really linked. So it will be easy to accept the lack of tolerance among Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa, these being the ethnic identities in Burundi. So bringing communities together helped us to create spaces where voicing different perspectives of the experienced violence to address collective trauma, deconstruct stereotypes around ethnic identity, competition or victimhood are all part of dealing with trauma. So beyond these groups, many understood that they are not the only ones that cannot even name where their beloved ones were buried, that they are not the only ones that they are still struggling with emotional wounds, and that is possible to deal with them. This is not to diminish the individual and collective suffering, but to encourage acceptance of the suffering of others and to not diminish facing one's trauma. Our work brings communities together through arts, dialogue, youth-elder exchanges, women-only spaces to confront silence, remember, and begin healing. So arts, theater, and graphic media become tools of remembrance, and remembrance that paves the way towards healing, tolerance, acceptance, and reconciliation, and in some circumstances, forgiveness. So while financial support is key, but also problematic in many contexts, like Burundi, it cannot stand alone and cannot also prevent the work around reparations and dealing with the past to happen. And while also public acknowledgement and apologies are also key and problematic, psychosocial support can be provided with the help of psychologists, professionals, but also through other supportive and complementary mechanisms as storytelling and memorial spaces that have been very, very instrumental in our contexts. So we've witnessed how community theater, storytelling, and comic books combined with mental health support spark transformation. They open hearts, and healing work helps them to feel enough safe to stay open. In all this, youth are the inheritors of not passive recipients of reparative justice, but they bring resilience, creativity, and vision. And big part of our work has been carried with an impressive involvement of youth and at all stages of our work, from the community level to the international level. And at the African Transitional Justice Forum, youth voices are challenging tokenism, saying that participation must be meaningful, not symbolic. They emphasize that institutional reparations must be co-created, not just delivered. So I implore us to see youth as leaders, to give them space at policy tables, to integrate their local experiences, their personal experiences, and their own expertise and innovativeness with continental frameworks like the AUTJP, and to trust them to turn reparative justice into societal renewal. So I would conclude that true reparations are healing journeys on cultural, emotional, and social dimensions, and they require space for memory, truth, and voice. They demand that we lift up youth as architects of justice in Africa. As we delve into reparative justice today, let us ask ourselves, have we moved beyond material compensation to embrace the emotional, cultural, and future-facing dimensions? Let us ensure that reparations become a foundation for healing, resilience, and genuine transformation. And talking about youth, we should understand and recognize that their participation is their power. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ms. Christina. Wasn't that so wonderful? Something I quoted so much from Ms. Christina as she was speaking is that youth are not passive recipients of reparative justice. But in that conversation, and here I'm paraphrasing, they bring resilience, they bring creativity. And so they are and they demand, or is I think they demand that the participation or the conversation around reparative justice is not just symbolic, but it is purposeful. So I really love this what we really because of what they bring. I want to thank Ms. and Nzima so much for emphasizing this, also the work of the sharing that she's giving, how it is. Thank you so much, Ms. Christella. Indeed, we are honored from you. And Mr. Gabriel, he is our mental health and psychosocial officer here at YORJA, and so he's going to take over the next part of the session. So, Mr. Gabriel.
Thank you, Angela. I just want to thank.
He holds master's degree in psychology, strong focus on psychology. It's very exciting. It's very exciting. This exciting person that is coming, Mr. Kadum, is, like I say, exam mental health psychology with a strong research focus on psychological trauma, secondary traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, mental health, and social support. Ogbong is dedicated to advancing the field of mental health. Let me Gambia works identify and delivers workshops and seminars. He's passionate and issues of social reconciliation and the African Continent cause. He currently serves as the mental health and psychosocial officer for YORJA. So, you are welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Angela. I want to thank
Mr.
all those.
Gabriel?
Thank you, Angela. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. I want to thank all those who have gone ahead of me. I want to thank Mosa for that interesting pool that she took us through. But also, I want to thank Christelle for that powerful keynote speech. And I think it has beautifully laid the ground for the conversations that we are about to have. As we have already begun to see, this conversation today is not just about history or policy. It's about the pain that has been carried across generations, about voices that were silenced, and about healing that is long overdue. Now, our discussion today highlights how historical injustices like the slavery and colonialism have left behind more than broken economies or displaced artifacts. And I think Enya mentioned that it's not just about the economy economic aspect, but also we will be looking at the psychological and emotional scars that many are still living with today. But also, I'm very happy that we are joined by a panel of a team that is on the ground, that is active, that has been carrying out some amount of healing in their communities. And they have joined us for this panel discussion today. So I would like to welcome Caroline, Stephen, and Gugu. Caroline Nthenya is a licensed and certified integrative psychotherapist with a career focused on promoting mental health in individuals and organizations. In corporate environments, Caroline serves as a reliable consultant for advancing employee mental wellness and improving organizational performance. Caroline employs a comprehensive approach that combines various therapeutic methods, enabling clients to build emotional resilience and self-awareness, enhance productivity, achieve significant personal transformation, and heal from trauma. She is currently a consultant psychologist and a PhD candidate holding a Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology with a specialization in trauma and a bachelor's degree in marriage and family therapy. Thank you, Caroline, for joining us today. Also on the panel is Gugu Shabalala. Gugu is the Mental Health and Psychosocial Support Manager at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. She's a trained social worker and mental health and psychosocial professional with 15 years experience working in the mental health sector. She has a particular focus on rehabilitation and redress for those affected by human rights violations through war, conflict, and torture, and their impact on the overall mental well-being of individuals, families, groups, and communities. Welcome, Gugu. Thank you for joining us today. And the last but not the least is Stephen Bernardus Harregate. He's a passionate youth development practitioner and dedicated advocate for transitional justice and mental health. With over a decade of experience in the nonprofit and government sectors, Stephen has worked extensively across Africa, promoting social change through community engagement, policy development, and advocacy. Founded Conversations for Change, a social enterprise providing mental health support to young leaders and technologies, a startup addressing food security and challenges in Africa. Welcome, Stephen. I want to welcome all the members of the panel. This gives me hope that we are talking to people who are very, very experienced and who are going to enrich our conversations this afternoon. I encourage all of us that if we have any questions that we might want to ask, I encourage us to leave that in the chat section and we will get to that. Maybe just to move on to the first person on the panel, which is Caroline, I would want you to lay the ground for us. Would you want to maybe briefly demystify what trauma is, especially in your work as a trauma psychologist?
Good afternoon from Kenya. Thank you very much, Gabriel. I'm pleased to be here and happy to be part of this panel. I first of all want to thank Mosa for the activity she's given us. She's actually summarized what I wanted to talk about today, which was very lovely. Thank you also, Christella, for letting us know really what we are dealing about when we talk about reparative justice and mental health matters. And to answer your question, Gabriel, about what trauma is. Different scholars have defined trauma in various ways. But there are two things which cut across, and that is that there is an event and there are long-lasting adverse effects on the individual. There is, however, one definition by Samsha 2012 that I find encapsulates trauma. And it states that trauma is an event or a series of events that is experienced. Please underline the word experienced. That is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally threatening, or life, like it's a danger to their life, and has long-lasting adverse effects, thus affecting the person's way of functioning, daily functioning, and also their overall well-being. I'd also like to add that trauma is subjective, in that in a particular event, one individual might experience trauma as traumatic to them, the event as traumatic to them, and another one as not. And perhaps you might be asking, how come in the similar event, one person is experiencing it as traumatic and the other one is not? It all depends on someone's capability to deal with that threatening event, someone's internal capacity or resources to deal with or cope with something that is threatening, as well as the external resources available when someone goes through a traumatic event.
Thank you, Caroline. I like the fact that you have mentioned that trauma can be a little bit subjective in the sense that it's different for different people. But one of the things that you've mentioned that is important is that it's a life-threatening event, right? So if we look at the issue of colonialism and slavery, can we say that those experiences might have been life-threatening for them to have been traumatic, especially to our ancestors?
Indeed, they were life-threatening, and they did cause intergenerational trauma, which is traumatic responses passed down from one generation to another. You see, intergenerational trauma is not experienced directly by individuals, it's transmitted. The way the first person experienced the traumatic event and the way they coped with it, that is what they pass on to the next generation.
Okay, thank you for that insightful information. And maybe just to move to the second person on the panel, which is Google, just to ask, in your experience with CSVR and community healing, what psychological or emotional needs tend to be overlooked in the aftermath of historical injustices?
Thank you so much, Gabrielle, and thank you everyone who's joined us today. As Gabrielle has said, my name is Gugu, and I've been with CSVR for the last 10 years. And I've been doing this work, working with communities that have experienced trauma for the last 18 years now. So it's, and what's been interesting for me is just the noticing one of the main psychological needs is around the witnessing, co-witnessing with victims. So the need for validation. Victims or those who've experienced trauma often just want to be heard. They want someone to acknowledge that what they experienced, that traumatic event that Caroline spoke about, that it did happen, because as we know, with violations, there's often denial around what happened. Somebody will say, but it was part of the system. It wasn't me, or it was normal back then. So victims often look for validation and acknowledgement. And then when you look at what trauma does, right, at a community level, it fragments. And when a society is fragmented, so then you have social bonds that are broken. And a lot of the psychological needs are around repairing those social bonds in a society. So rebuilding the relationships, because often enough, the perpetrator and victims live in the same community. They've been viewing each other as enemies. And so now when you're talking about post-conflict, you have to rebuild those relationships. You have to also start investing in mental health resources. There's a need for mental health resources culturally sensitive mental health resources, because not everyone is going to need counseling. I'm a therapist, I vote for counseling, but not everyone votes for that. So there's a need. One of the most overlooked is culturally sensitive mental health, access to mental health services. And then you look at the need for restorative justice practices or interventions to help that society heal. When communities are broken and fragmented, they lose their voice. So people will talk about when a transitioning is happening, they'll say, but then the community wasn't participating, people were not involved. But forgetting that the people were not involved because they've lost their voice, they were repressed. A removal of an old system doesn't just guarantee now a revived new community. These have to be invested in, then there has to be a rebuilding. So there's a need for empowerment of a society. If you talk about repression like colonialism, if you look at who was colonized, right, they didn't see the future for them. They didn't see themselves going to universities, so they didn't plan forward. So there's no future thinking. So when you now have post-conflict rebuilding or you're addressing some of the consequences of the trauma, you have to start helping people see that there's a vision, there's a future. There's something that they can look forward to. So those needs around future visioning, around healing for that society, empowerment, ensuring that mental health resources are culturally sensitive, validation, and even helping people to connect culturally, like to things that they thought were demonic because maybe they weren't allowed to practice them. You now have to, it's like sort of giving people permission to connect with themselves, with their culture. So all of those things cannot be ignored. And there's also what Caroline spoke about, intergenerational support, because if you look at how violations happen, they don't just happen over 1 year. We have countries in Africa that have been under conflict for 20 something years. And that means that there's been generations and generations that have experienced these violations and trauma. So therefore, when you're now moving forward, one of the needs that gets ignored is the need for intergenerational support. Intergenerational healing for young people and for older people. And that is contextually relevant for that community or that society.
Thank you, Gugu. I like the fact you've mentioned the issue of the losing of the voice, right? When we speak of the effect of colonialism or slavery, most people say it has happened, forget about it and let us move on. But how do people move on if they have lost their voice, right? And so it's an important aspect of how do we get regain our voices and to achieve that healing that is necessary even after 20, 50 years of slavery and colonialism. And I think one of the things you have mentioned there is that the programs have to be culturally sensitive depending on the community that you're engaging. Maybe just on a personal note, can you tell us of an experience in your work with community engagement where this psychosocial support might have brought a difference in the work that you're doing, that might have made a difference?
I mean, one of my favorite examples or success stories has been around the transitional justice process in the Gambia. And it was, I think it gave us an opportunity to see what happens when a mental health and psychosocial approach instead of a service-orientated intervention is implemented. And so from the beginning, we were able to work with like community-based organizations, leaders and CSOs and government to integrate mental health and psychosocial support as an approach, not just saying you need 50 psychologists and social workers, but saying when you think about policies, how do you engage, when you think about policies that will engage victims, how do you, and you acknowledge that people have been violated and therefore do not trust the system, how do you best invest in building trust before moving forward? And we've seen how that then has led to a community-led process where communities, CSOs, and different organizations within the Gambian community are taking that up even post the transitioning. And now in the rebuilding, the development phase, we are seeing how these organizations are still continuing with leading the process, because it was where it wasn't just service orientated, it was seen as an approach that was integrated at the different levels, and it was led by the community themselves. It wasn't experts reliant who then left after their UN or AU contracts left. It was led by the communities, and that's still continuing right now in holding the government accountable in ensuring that the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission are implemented. So then you get to see how community healing can be sustained and successful over time if it's given to communities and they're given the right tools, and the focus isn't just on one aspect of healing.
Okay, thank you for the great work of that example in Gambia. I hope that you can replicate that in many aspects in Africa. Maybe just moving to Stephen. Stephen, recently we are seeing the youth asking that they want to be part of the conversation. In Kenya, that's what is happening when we talk about the Gen Z movement. And that is the call actually to actually listen to the voice of the youth and all that. And maybe just in your engagement and in your work with the youth, what do you think are some of the aspects that you see some of this trauma that comes up when you in your work with the youth?
Thank you so much, Gabriel. Can you hear me? All right.
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. And thank you so much to Google, Caroline, and Christella for really setting the table so well. They make my work much, much easier. And so I will stand on what they have already provided, and really just picking up from what Google has spoken about. We cannot have a conversation around intergenerational justice or intergenerational trauma without young people, because they are the carriers of the pain. And they are also the ones that are interrupting a lot of the times, a lot of these narratives that have been pushed through. And when we're thinking about it, the truth is a lot of this youth are being celebrated for surviving a system that haven't acknowledged the harm that they've inherited. And I think that's something we need to acknowledge. And that's not just justice. It's about the neglect of young people. Too often, they have given a seat at the table to shape an agenda, but without any tools to be able to challenge that agenda that actually pulls them into that space and really says, from your perspective, in your language, in your perspective, in worldview, how does this actually look like? And I love what I think it was Ms. Caroline who mentioned that trauma is individual, it's subjective to your experience, and that intergenerational trauma, furthermore, is those traits that are coming in. Therefore, it has to be nuanced and reflective to the experiences of young people that we're engaging with. And so when we talk about reparative justice, we have to go beyond just that token inclusion of youth for just the sake of inclusion. We need to be seeing young people really not just as participants of that, but leading budgets, designing the repair. What does that actually look like? Because it's easy to say, have a young person come and speak and give a contribution, take a quote. But when you talk about program design, as Google has spoken about, communities designing the program, it's saying young people, help us design that programs. And here is actually finances and funding for you to actually do that program and go through. One of the things that I think we also want to flag really is that we have to acknowledge the emotional labor that showing up in these kind of conversations also happens when we talk about memorialization, silencing, and repair, because it's somebody's experience, it's somebody's worldview that they're engaging with. And it's both the silent wounds that people are experiencing and sometimes public wounds that people experience. And young people are part of that conversation that we need to also be careful in providing care in terms of how we're responding. And I think about this work primarily from my grounding in social work, which really thinks about from navigating a systemic trauma, because I've said with families and children and young people, and try to think about how they design support systems that understand healing not just as a personal thing, but a political work that needs to happen as well. That it's not about crisis intervention of what's going on, but using the theory of practice to integrate this conversation. For example, if you think about the systems theory, it helps us understand that trauma operates, as the panelists have already said, both on an individual level, but across institutions and also across societies. And it reminds us then that harm is often patterned and that structural intervention of these patterns is often what happens being repeated. And that's when you talk about a system just changing ownership, but not actually evolving and responding to the real needs of the people that are before us. And part of the critical theory that, of course, we also see is that it pushes us to question who holds power, who justifies what injustice looks like or is normalized, and what accountability actually looks like, especially for communities who, as was already said, are historically silenced. And therefore, the strengths-based approach that we're thinking about when we talk to young people is not just about resilience, but it's about affirming young people who have been resisting and healing long before the systems arrived and acknowledged them. They have been doing the work. Young people have been on the ground long before they've been seen as well. So I come to this conversation really thinking about intergenerational trauma, not just as in private inheritance of me as an individual or the young people that are experiencing the trauma that is passed down through one person, but really thinking about the culture of violence that continues to be perpetuated in our society, and then the socioeconomic results that come as a result of this injustices, the historical legacies that come as a part of what's going on. It's coded language, it's budgets, it's silences. And when you think about even Namibia's atrocities in terms of the genocide of the Herero and Nama people, it wasn't just a historical crime, really. It was a prototype. And the truth is that the colonial playbook has not changed. It was a systemic violation of a people group and communities. And therefore, when we respond, it has to be systemic in that level as well. Because often it starts with dehumanization, it's justification of removal, it's building systems that erase that return. And I can see that even globally right now, what is happening worldwide. And that's why collective memory matters, because when we remember what has happened, we can be able to frame what it shapes and how it becomes acceptable. And young people have been doing that, both using social media, using healing community groups, using arts and crafts, using song and dance, going to the historical repositories and pulling out the stuff that has been in the cultural erasure that has taken place and saying this is actually who we were before colonialization came in. This is who we were before this white supremacy came in that space. And therefore, I think one of the things that I want to leave with us is really that the moment Namibia, for example, offers is an opportunity as not just a victim of historical atrocity, but as a moral voice for global justice, right? How can a nation that claims to acknowledge one genocide turn its back on another? And that's some of the things we're continuing to have an impact right now, and now who holds power and how we speak about that as well. And that's why the paradox of modern day power, who claims memory and who refuses moral clarity in the name of injustice of the past, and who funds it currently in the present, all of those things are things we need to think about. And from a systemic level, make that response. And that's why I am very happy about this national agenda, on a continental agenda that the African Union has passed, both for this year and for the next decade, to say we have to have a collective response, because there was a collective violence that was perpetrated towards people.
Thank you, Stephen. I like the fact that you've mentioned the systems theory, right? Where it's calling us to address the whole issue at a whole, not just at one part or leaving out other aspects. And that is important for us. Like Davis Bula mentions there in the comment section, that trauma, the issue of trauma and the wounds of colonialism is deep. And so for us to address those deep wounds, it has to be a systematic approach. And maybe just to ask you further, what are some of the mental health programs that you integrate into your peace building efforts in the work that you do with the young people?
So what has been really great to see is, even before I got in this space, it was really finding a community of young people that have been on this work for a very long time. And it's really been amplifying that. As I've mentioned before, one of the things that we've tried to do is talk about mental health not just as a therapeutic intervention, but expand the conversation to say it's about processing the trauma that has happened. It's about truth telling, and using different mediums to do so. I think, especially with the work that I do with young boys and men, there's the stigma around we don't want to just sit in front of somebody and speak and talk. So we found opportunities using like sports and recreational activities such as like that, soccer, to say like we're gonna have a conversation around this. We're gonna have while playing a 5-5 football match. We're also going to have conversations around using your body to build movements, or going running, etc., and really finding new ways to think about what healing looks like, as opposed to engaging through just speaking. And I think talking therapies are fantastic, no qualms against that, but I think there is a stigma, I guess, especially for people to think there's nothing wrong with me, therefore I don't want to go talk to somebody. So how can you create new avenues for people to be able to process that, getting the same result and outcome, but using a different medium? So using sports, using arts. One of the young people we've been working with has been doing some work around building new sculptures and re-celebrating different heroes in our Namibian context, right? Who are the people that are in the history, in Black history, in Namibian history, that have been forgotten? And how do we start to elevate their names and stuff like that? So those are some of the ways we've been able to have those conversations and healing through that. Some of them have gone through talking therapies, group therapies that we've consulted as well. And then traditional work, right? So using traditional dance, traditional music, etc., and taking ownership of what that identity look like, because that cultural genocide is something we don't often speak about as well, where you've almost that has been erased. And I think a lot of young people reclaiming that is how we're starting to see that healing taking place as well, because my identity is no longer defined by what somebody else had told me, but as young people are reclaiming what that identity looks like for us now, even within the technological space.
Thank you, Stephen. There's something you've mentioned there which is important, and that talk therapy is not enough. Those of us in the mental health space are beginning to realize that the trauma is stored in the body, and so some kind of physical therapy, something that gets people going to let go of that, is important. And if it is through football, then that is very, very helpful. So I'm glad that you are towing that line and doing a lot of work in that aspect. And maybe just to come back to Caroline, in your therapeutic practice, how do you approach generational trauma? What are some of the strategies that you have mentioned? Like Stephen has said, he uses football at least to get people to come together and express themselves physically. What are some of these strategies that you use in your work?
Thank you, Gabriel. And I truly appreciate the conversation that is going on. I appreciate what Stephen is even sharing, because I use the same strategies. That is expressive arts, group sessions, talking about the events, what happened, speaking the truth. But there are steps I do follow. And the first one, especially at the community level, is helping community members become aware of what they have been experiencing. What we understand in the psychological field is that it's very important to name a feeling, very important to name an experience. And so bringing them to the awareness that what you've been going through is this and this. The next step is helping them to acknowledge what they are experienced or what they are currently experiencing. Acknowledging emotions, acknowledging experiences. I think it was Google who talked about that acknowledgement that something happened without ignoring that it ever happened. And I think also Christella talked about it. And this helps them see what and how they have been living their lives and what is happening to family members and even the community. The other step is helping them process those events, process those emotions. And by doing so, they get to this position of getting in touch with themselves as they were before they experienced the trauma. I'd like to add that intergenerational trauma and trauma generally is quite complex. And it becomes even more complex for Africans in the sense that majority have not embraced mental health services, counseling services, as even Stephen has said. And you see, when it comes to trauma, that support, timely support, really matters on how that person is going to overcome or handle the experiences of that threat or that event. And if people are not open to, accepting something has happened, processing what has happened, it becomes difficult to heal. And there's that never-ending cycle of trauma. Someone has talked about young people in careers of pain and conduits of justice. That is very true. And you see, if intergenerational trauma is not understood, is not dealt with, the same youths that we are working with are the same people who are being hurt or are in this space of pain because they've not processed or gone through healing. And so it's important to recognize the symptoms of even intergenerational trauma among the youth and even the older generation.
Thank you for that, Caroline, and I'm glad that you've highlighted some of those points there that Stephen had mentioned. One of the things that you have also highlighted there is the aspect of helping people. Maybe just to throw this question to Google, how do you help process trauma, especially when there's still this stigmatization and negative connotation around mental health conversations? How then do you help people in these communities, Google?
Sorry, Gabrielle, I think I lost you there for a few seconds. Could you please repeat the question?
Oh, the question was, Caroline talked about people need to be able to recognize and the trauma and the issues going on. But we all know that in the African space, when we talk about mental health issues, it's something that there's still a lot of stigmatization. So how do you help these communities that are not really open to discussing matters mental health?
Okay. And I'd like to think that it isn't because people don't want to, right? That they're not interested in being well. But I think it's the way we come from. If you look at where we come from, the perspective of there's something wrong with you, instead of acknowledging the trauma of what has happened to you, instead of acknowledging that an individual isn't supposed to have experienced years of oppression where they've been devalued, where they've been treated as a second-class citizen. So instead of acknowledging victims, we tend to play community that has been important. It's been around normalizing conversations around mental health. So we're not coming from a diagnosis perspective where we say, this is what is wrong with you, but it's really looking at how does what has happened to you explain how you react to certain things? It's understandable, right? Because coping mechanisms, we think coping mechanisms are these special things, but coping mechanisms literally are the way you live, are the patterns you develop to survive the oppression. So they served you at the time, they're no longer serving you now as a community. How do you change that? How do you have conversations with communities around that? And Caroline spoke about the need for awareness raising. The importance of just helping people understand. And having worked in South Sudan for like 9 years, one of the conversations we used to have was around people just coming to a conclusion that, damn it, we've been since 1955 experiencing this. So no wonder people react violently, because everyone would say South Sudanese people are violent. They were like, but If violence has been what you've been taught and how you've been reacting, what has kept you alive? Because if you weren't violent, somebody would have surely killed you or done something to you. So really helping communities understand how the coping mechanisms they've used have served them for a period of time. But now that they are in transition, maybe they're no longer in survival mode. So how do they interact with some of those? And also, I think this is like very important for me. It's bringing in professionals who also understand the context. So the shift from this medical diagnosis of PTSD because really you can't have everyone with PTSD in a society. It won't work because we don't have enough mental health professionals to address them in the way that we all were trained, right? So you need to then start looking at how do we have conversations that get people to treat this and work with how they are or what is happening to them, but also utilizing the bigger ecosystem. So then there's not an overburdening or the special treatment or the category of the people who are not well mentally. But we are saying this has happened to all of us. Of course, there'll be people who need services that are specialized, but everyone needs to. You can't live through war for 55 years and then just get to the other side and continue living. You have to learn new ways of coping in peace. How do you do this? So then the way that we have conversations with communities, the way we have conversations with professionals who treat people who need assistance, the education and awareness raising, normalizing conversations around trauma, not just making them about identifying what is wrong, but just like, this is what has happened to us. This is how we are dealing with it. Just normalizing how we putting it even in spaces where, like, I love this project that was using religious leaders who were now preaching about trauma in church. And everyone goes, most of Africans go to church, right? So how do you normalizing the conversation and having it taking place in a church setting? That is not on a doctor's couch or where it's in a hospital and I'm so scared I'm going to get my diagnosis, but it's happening in a normal environment. And I think those are some of the spaces we need to cultivate in order to build trust among communities, to destigmatize trauma and all the other mental health consequences of violations, of oppressions over time. And I think that will then make it easier for communities to engage with their mental health needs in a less threatening manner. So when we treat it in that way, I think then people will react the same way. So it's about creating the space of safety.
Okay.
Thank you.
That was very insightful. And I want to thank us for the conversation so far, because what you're saying there is that we need to, first of all, bring the conversation to people, to create an awareness for them to know what this thing is before we label them with the, that is a good point that you've mentioned there. Maybe as we come to the final round of the questions, I want to invite all of us, if you have your questions, please, I want you to drop them in the Q&A section so that the panelists can respond to the questions. And maybe just to follow up now with you, Gugu, maybe just the last question with you. Now that the AU has extended the reparation to about a decade, so up until 2036, what mental health or psychosocial support priorities do you think we need to address as a continent, and policies in extension?
For me, it's for me one of the most important policies we could have. You're looking at the AUTJP, is how really do we hold states accountable for the provision of mental health approaches and interventions beyond just confining it to the health sector, but looking at, because it's a mental health and psychosocial, right? The social bonds are broken. So when you look at policies that are responsible for fixing or reconstructing or rebuilding a country post-conflict, how do we ensure that these policies are grounded in a mental health approach? Steven spoke about systems, right? Because people weren't oppressed by people. It was they used systems. So how do we break the bondages so that we're not expecting communities to survive oppressive systems while we're expecting them to be resilient? Because then that the two do not complement each other, but are in total opposite of what they meant to achieve. So for me, one of the things I always think of is an integrated approach to mental health and psychosocial support is one of the most basic policies we can look at, like integrating it in health, integrating it in justice, how victims are treated when they interact with justice. Even when we talk of reparations, MHPSS should stop being used as a pacifier. You know, the easy, low-hanging tree. Let's get everyone to forgive each other, then we can let the perpetrators go. No, that's not what it's meant to do. It's meant to be a building block for a society that is fully engaged or can engage in rebuilding after conflict. So I think for me, just at the basic level, is really looking at integrating an MHPSS approach into all the policies that we are looking to in development. When we think about it, how do we look at how the impact of trauma, of intergenerational trauma, and for instance, when we engage in young people, how do we look at, okay, if instead of labeling them as angry, where does the anger come from? And have we done enough to address the anger? Have we implemented policies and our systems responding effectively to address the trauma that young people are displaying? Because the violence is just the symptom. What caused it, and being able and having policies at different levels that look at responding to those things, and economic emancipation. Because you can't talk mental health and not talk, it has 8, I always say there are 8 aspects to mental well-being. If you're not financially and economically well, I don't care how much therapy you get, you are not going to be well. So those need to go hand in hand as well, looking at how do we, hence I'm saying that the need for an integrated approach that looks at, because it offers us a very safe and one can say low-hanging fruit way of intervening and working with policies. Yeah.
Thank you for that,
Thanks,
and for the aspect of integrating your aspect about integrating psychosocial help. And as you talk about integrative psychosocial help, the person that comes to mind is Caroline, because she's an integrative psychotherapist. And just to ask Caroline further, you work with organizations in integrating mental health policies. How has that gone, or what insight can you give us from that experience of yours?
Come again, please.
As an integrative psychotherapist, especially working with organizations to integrate mental health support around the work environment, what insight can you give us as a continent, as countries, in integrating mental health support in our policies on the ground level and continentally?
That's a good question. I would say to integrate means, first of all, to acknowledge what is and the ideal situation. So what is, in this case, we are talking about trauma, reparation, healing, and integrating mental health into every other system. Some tips I can give is, first of all, acknowledging the importance of mental health. You cannot integrate something that you do not believe is helpful or you do not advocate for. So the first thing is accepting and, acknowledging the importance of mental health. Another thing is coming to a space of acknowledging that wrong has been done and something has to be done to right that wrong. If people do not acknowledge, it becomes difficult to practice. For instance, what we are talking about, and even what Google has just mentioned about integrating mental health in all systems. if the government itself is not making use of, let's say, mental health services on themselves, individually on themselves, it becomes difficult to implement. And so being able to embrace and practice helps integrate. And also assisting people to really go down to the community and see what is happening at that community level, without just talking about it in boardrooms and making policies, without really living among the people or being with the people to feel or try to feel as they feel and live as they feel, as they live. And so I would say integration is both practical and needs to be embraced by those who are actors of reparation.
Thank you, Caroline. I like the aspect of we embracing what we propose. And maybe just lastly to Stephen, where would you want to see organizations, like fellow organizations, what work would you want them to do going forward, especially during this time for the call for reparation by the African Union? What work would you want to see between organizations with regards to mental health and psychosocial support?
Sure. Thanks, Gabriel. I think there's a couple of things we need to think about. I think there is one is recognizing who's in the room. So get a sense of who's around, who's particularly engaged in this space, and then expanding that conversation to think about who are we not thinking about? What are the sectors that are not speaking about? So there are people that are specialists such as us who are in the mental health space. How do you build in other CSOs who might be more in the economic space, in the financial space, in the legal spaces, to also be able to get and learn about this work from that mental health lens as well? I think that's very important. So it's getting a sense, firstly, of who's in the room, and secondly, it's about increasing our reach in terms of getting new sectors involved in this work. Then the third thing is really there's many grassroots youth organizations across the continent. How we, I guess, and it's us using our platform to elevate that a little bit more. Those that are youth-led, youth-driven organizations in this work to say, what are you doing? How do you amplify that? I think a lot of the conversations, it's easy to kind of get lost, as the speakers already said, into a state-to-state conversation. And it is on us, it's incumbent on us as young people and peers to be able to say, here's a young person that's doing incredible work in this country. Here's a youth group that they're doing work with, or here's an activity that they're doing with. What are the best practices that are there? And we have finding ways to collaborate and share across those learnings as far as possible. Then the last thing that I think from CSO levels that we need to do is hold accountability. The policies are there, as we always continue to say. So we need to demand for more funding, because again, the excuse is that the policy, but we don't have money to actually implement the policy. So we need to demand for more funding in those specific policy levels. We need to find new language or expand our language to be able to say, how do we talk about transitional justice? How do we talk about healing, repair in maybe a different format, but allows us to be able to push for more funding to get the work and outcomes that we need. And then the last thing that I want to also highlight for us as we're thinking about communities and building that out is to say, is there new ways that on innovations that are coming in that we're seeing on the continent, and how do we profile that, right? I think often we think about African and cultural sensitive responses as thinking from the past and what has been done, but young people are creating culture as we speak. So how do we leverage those movements? How do we leverage those opportunities that is already happening in real time and riding those waves, as opposed to saying it has to kind of look a certain way before they can participate, or it has to sound a specific way before they can participate, because we need to give young people the freedom to articulate. And sometimes it's not comfortable. Sometimes they want to say the stuff in the most politically correct way, but we have to be able to provide that space and confidence for young people to articulate what that actually looks like for them as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you about the aspect of networking, funding in the space, and holding ourselves accountable for the policies that are out there. It is my hope and aspiration that as we move forward, we will be able to work together as organizations, as countries, as continents, to promote this conversation that we have started here today. So I'm really grateful to the team. And maybe just before we round this, there are some questions that I have here, about two of them. The first is from Patience, and this is addressed to Google. The question is, please, can you expatiate on culturally sensitive mental health services, if possible, with instances from your interactions with communities? Gugu, that is for you. Did you get that?
Yes, I did,
Okay.
Gabriel. I think, well, and that's the thing, right, about culturally sensitive is that it's dependent on the community. And the only way one can have these is through conversations and understanding the context of the community. Hence, I was saying that it's so important to have professionals who are familiar with or who even understand the context that the community exists within. I mean, as I said, like I provide talk therapy as a therapist for the last 18 years. But I've worked with communities that engage in traditional forms of healing. And so in order for them to, especially communities that have experienced loss, I worked in KZN in South Africa, and during the violence in KZN, there were disappearances of many family members, and they still don't know where they are. And for them, not being able to bury their loved ones posed a blockage to them moving forward because they haven't been able to. And we know in different African cultures, it's so important to at least be able to point the grave of your loved ones. And I remember having to engage in having to allow the community to engage in what one might say is a ritual, but for them, this was a healing that they required as a community, a healing ritual that they needed to organize in order to have a space that they can then claim and say, this belongs to so and so, and this is where we can go as a community or as a family of this person when we need to speak to them. It had nothing to do with me. I may not subscribe to it. I may not believe in it, but because it allowed the community and the family members of that individual to get their healing, to get their closure. It was something that we had to actually arrange through our space as CSVR at the time. And one of the interesting things about that was that the very next week, the family member got a job. And he said, you see, this is what I needed to do in order for things to open up in my life. And he had been in therapy for 3 years and he couldn't move because this was something that was stuck for him, that sense of closure that was lacking. And we were talking about it. We had done shadow work. We had done so many things in my talk therapy. But because remember, as Caroline said, trauma is very individualized. So is healing. We can't apply a one-size-fits-all to healing. People heal in ways that they've always healed in. People will survive with or without us, and that's a fact. And so sometimes we have to allow the space and make those spaces safe for communities, for individuals to say, I need this. And for me, I'm always saying, as long as it's not harmful to anyone, including the person themselves, what's the harm if it will give the person? And I offer the same respect to it in the same way that I respect my books, my DSM-5, and everything that I've been taught from university. So for me, I think what's so important is offering people, and it's almost like that giving of an okay permission. Because communities for so long feel like they don't have the space. There's like a cultural erosion when you are oppressed. So when you now get the space, and people who say, no, it's okay. Those things belong to you. They are part of your identity. It makes communities feel safe and they can start reclaiming them as things that are resilience building or even healing, that bring about healing for them in their space. So I think it's important to allow communities to identify. I always say, what's the worst that could happen? Community can tell you what they need and you can say, no, I have nothing to do with that. Go ahead, but I don't practice that. And that is fine. But as long as they feel like they have a say in the form of healing that you are bringing in their space.
Thank you for
I
that.
hope
Wow,
that answers.
that was really insightful. I hope that answers your question, Patience. But I know that one of the things that we're invited around the mental health space, especially as therapists, is to acknowledge the cultural practices of people. And it's interesting that a little thing as called a burial ceremony is following the cultural aspect can bring healing. It can be helpful for grief and loss. So thanks for that, Gugu, and that was quite insightful. The second question, if you have any other question, you can drop it in the question and answer box, or the next question is from Davis Bula. Davis Bula is saying, how can African communities begin to unlearn internalized inferiority or self-hate? Caroline, would you want to take this on? How can African communities begin to unlearn internalized inferiority or self-hate?
That's a very good question. I think we can do this by changing the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell our children. Life narratives are very powerful. They can help us grow, they can help us thrive, or they can keep us in the same space of oppression. Something that was said in the discussion was, actually it's Google who talked about creating safe space for storytelling. Community social healing is very powerful. And in these setups, we are able to challenge false narratives. We are able to challenge stereotypes. We are able to challenge even stigma. It is a space where we can talk about truth and reality. And to change and unlearn something internalized, something like I'm inferior, or I'm not worthy, or I don't amount to something. It's a story someone has been telling themselves for a very long time. And to unlearn that, they need to tell themselves a new story. And this new story can only come about by challenging what is not true, by challenging what has been told to us and is not the reality. And so I would say through changing the way we view events and the life narratives we have and we pass on to our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. One other person I would like to acknowledge here is Mr. Taylor. I know you walk around this space and you've done a lot of work with the community. You would want to just say to us with regards to the topic as we bring this to an end. This is David Taylor. Okay, I'm guessing he's. Can you hear me if you're there? All right. Maybe just to say thank you to our panelists, but before we call it a day, there are some comments here that I would like to just read to us. Davis Bula says, also we can look at promoting Afrocentric education, healthcare, governance, and business systems that reflect our values and context. I like the fact that today we have used a lot of words regarding context, values as Africans and as our various cultures. The next comment is from Rutendo. She says, this is a very great conversation. Being in the mental health space, it's really good to think about the fact that our healthcare systems are not designed to treat everyone with PTSD, especially when the trauma experience was collective trauma. The integration of conversations onto pulpit into sport is definitely important to influence healing on the mass level. Yes, on a mass level. That way, mental health care professionals are not only ones championing mental health care, but all of us. That says a lot that we are all involved and we are all called to undertake this task that of healing and our community engagement. I want to thank our panelists today, Caroline, Gugu, and Stephen. Thanks for your insights. Thank you for sharing your work with us and for the things that you have done and for encouraging us on our way forward. And I hope that as a continent, I hope that as countries, I hope as individuals, as we begin these conversations, we will become more and more aware of them and do what is necessary to achieve community healing and reparation. So thank you, Angela. Let me hand this back to you. Angela?
Hi, please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, all right. Thank you so much, Gabriel. Thank you so very much, all our panelists, for the discussion. Thank you so much, everyone, for the questions. Thank you, everyone. And now we're going to invite our Executive Director, the Executive Director of YORJA, Miss Angeline Abo, to share with us some closing remarks and also talk about YORJA, who we are, what we do, and how you can participate with us or join us. Yes, thank you. Miss Angeline, you're ready. Hello, Miss Angeline.
Thank you very much, Angela. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. First of all, I would like to extend my very sincere gratitude to our keynote speaker, Ms. Cristela, and to all our panelists. Thank you very much for your time. To all the participants, a big thank you for your powerful insights and reflections, and a very special thank you to the YORJA team, particularly to Angela, Gabriel, and Musa, for enabling this, for enabling us to have this conversation and for planning and facilitating this webinar. So, as Angela rightfully put it, this year's theme, reparations, could not be more timely. And perhaps it's time we put up the message on a billboard or we get T-shirts. Thank you, Angela, for that. We'll think about that. And I think as global conversations around justice and accountability start to gain momentum, we're reminded that just as our keynote speaker, Ms. Cristela, emphasized, that reparative justice should not just be symbolic. We should move beyond symbolic and tokenism, and it should be real. So what we've had today is a very powerful reminder that healing from intergenerational trauma takes time, and it requires recognition, and it also requires deliberate action from each and every one of us. So there is need for collective memory, which is not just about honoring the past, but it's also about building a just future. So it's also very clear that reparations takes different forms, just as we've had from all our speakers. We don't have a one size that fits all, because we have to acknowledge people's different lived experiences, because for someone, reparations could be monetary compensation. To another person, it could be that psychological support. It could be some form of cleansing, as Google rightfully mentioned. Or it could simply being restoration or just going back to normalcy. So I just hope that today's dialogue has sparked a deeper commitment, as it has for me when it comes to collective healing and action. So I just want to thank you all, to thank everyone again for joining us, and let us continue this journey of healing together. And also let us break the cycle of trauma and work towards healing. So thank you very much to everyone who joined us today. And I'm wishing you a lovely evening and a good weekend ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And we hope that you can continue to join us. We have more events coming up. We have more programs coming up. So do follow us on our social media handles. It's at YORJA, and you can check out our website too. It's also www. I'm going to link it here, but please do check us out. And I do hope we can continue to participate and make sure that the Africa that we want to see, we do have a hand in making it so. So thank you so much for joining us. Yes, follow us on our social media handles. Participate. We have a lot of programs coming up. Participate, join in. We're very glad to have you today, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.